So the US, along with the UK, Canada, the Netherlands, and Australia, have advised their athletes attending the Beijing Genocide Games to use burner phones to counter Chinese spying, as the CCP recently exclaimed that personal information collected by the Beijing 2022 will not be disclosed unless the disclosure is necessary. It is, of course, anybody's guess on when disclosure becomes necessary. How would you advise the athletes attending the games to stay out of harm's way? Thank you, Mr. Bannon.
Olivia, think for a second of the absurdity of the question you had to ask, given the information's out there. Think about it for a second. Athletes of the world who are not political, who just focus on intensely focused to get at the Olympic level, the intense focus from when you're a little child to be at that caliber of a Olympic athlete. We have no time or anything else but that maniacal focus on perfecting what you do in that sport. Think about this for a second. When your time comes to actually go and to have that one moment in time in your athletic career to blossom and compete on the world stage, and something historic that you'll be able to tell, not just represent your country, but will be able to tell your children and grandchildren, will be passed down forever in your family. Your government warns you that don't take your, which all young people, obviously it's an important part of their life. You can't take your personal iPhone. You have to take a burner phone, because the place we're sending you to that are hosting the Olympic Games will be spying on you nonstop and stealing your information for untoward. Think of the absurdity of it. By definition, why would any parent allow their child to go into that situation? And why would any government that believes in freedom or liberty go into that situation and put their athletes in the situation? But even more importantly, why would the Olympic Committee and everybody that talks about the Olympics is the spirit of freedom and the spirit of self-determination and self-reliance and the individual coming together to represent their country and their countrymen in these games? It's supposed to be the time in the ancient Greece when all the wars stopped. Why would you be doing that on a country that treated the outsiders like this? Well, think of what they treat the people that are slaves that every day have to really have a burner phone camera, their own phone. This is how we've gotten. How do we even get here? How can, with a straight face, those governments say that and send those athletes into harm's way? If that's the situation, then you can't go. If you even have a question that they're going to sit there and steal all your information and use it for nefarious means, it's absurd. This thing is absurd on so many levels. It is so morally wrong for the corporations, the sponsors, the TV networks from BBC to the NHK to NBC to Sky, to all of it. Everybody's got rights, and they'll be showing even clips of it. It's so wrong on every moral level, not just put your own athletes in harm, but principally the suppression of the Chinese people in Beijing, and the horrible, not just the Uyghurs, which is the most, part that we've seen throughout the world, but really this the Chinese people overall. How we can be a party to this will be a black mark. I mean, they will look back on this in 50 years when the Chinese people are free, and they'll be in the teaching in Shanghai and Beijing of modern Chinese history and the liberation movement that the Chinese people eventually threw off this criminal organization. And they're going to look back over what happened during these Olympics, and they're going to pull this interview because they're going to say, hey, on the 19th of January, 2 weeks almost from the thing, America was the biggest sponsor because they gave them the biggest TV contract. We're talking about this. We're talking about the absurdity of warning the athletes to take burner phones because your information will be taken. It's absurd on the face of it. It should be shut down. One, obviously for health reason, for the virus that's spreading all over China. Number two, for what you talked about, the suppression and putting athletes in harm's way. And number three, for obviously the moral and ethical reasons of the suppression and really brutal dictatorship that the people of China have to live under on every different level, from the very practical to the very philosophical and ethic and everything in between. And so 50 years from now, when they teach this in the high schools of China, of the great liberation of Beijing, the Chinese people, they'll be taught that we won our freedom, not just against the criminal organization in Beijing, but all their partners throughout the world. All of these corporations that are supposed to be so woke and so awakened to racial equality and to inequality throughout the world, that it was these that actually were our greatest oppressors, because it had been so easy to get rid of the criminal organization. When the Chinese Communist Party falls, the one thing everybody's going to say the next day is, why did this take so long? Why did it take so long? That's what they're going to teach in schools in Beijing and in Shanghai in 50 years. How did this happen? Why did it take so long? Why was the world not awakened to it? And particularly, there's a point in time in not just 2008 for those games, because the world had not awakened enough then, but certainly given everything that had happened, and particularly the CCP virus, and now more exposure to the Uyghurs and the Tibetan Buddhists and the Beijing and organ harvesting and all of it. that you have no excuse now not to be able to understand it. Young people will ask the question. The hands will be raised by 9 and 10-year-old kids who go, how did all these organizations throughout the world that all talk about liberty and freedom, why were they our real oppressors? Why did they partner with these gangsters to do it? That will be the question. That's why I'm so confident we're on the right side of history. I can look in the mirror every day and say, yes, dedicating a huge part of my life to assist the Chinese people in freedom is the biggest moral question we have in the world. And when those kids raise their hands 50 years from now in those classrooms in Beijing and Shanghai throughout China, they're going to understand that the War Room and Bannon and others in the Trump movement stood and had their back at this time and called out that this thing should be shut down and it's an abomination. And quite frankly, their grandparents were kept in slavery because of this exact type of thinking by the free organizations of the world.